Hello, everybody, and welcome to ABL Down on the Farm, episode 50, where we talk all things baseball fantasy prospecting, but especially prospecting in the ABL, a 30-team Dynasty league with 20 slots per team for minor leaguers for a glorious 600 prospects. And tonight, I wanted to focus on a handful of prospects that are having really interesting starts to the season, some good, some bad, to start to think about whether these players are buy, sells, or hold, or something in between. They're getting a lot of attention in social media and amongst fantasy baseball industry circles. So I thought I would talk about them in order. So without further ado, I'll get my show started. And the first guy on tonight's hit list, so to speak, is Tate Gray of the Tampa Bay Rays, who's definitely getting a lot of hot treatment in the industry right now. He's 18 years old. He has been assigned to full season A ball. And so I wanted to pause on that for a second, just to emphasize that point. Not all 18-year-olds start in full season A ball. There is actually a shorter season A ball that they can start in. And oftentimes people who come over from the DSL or high school prospects do start in the shorter season A ball. The Rays accelerated Gray rather aggressively into full season A ball, which is a slight vote of confidence. So he's slightly younger than the competition he's facing in that league. So 18 years old, full season A ball, positive sign in and of itself that the Rays felt confident advancing him to that level. And he has certainly responded. He's hitting 305, 430, 516. That's a slash line. But perhaps most impressively, he's got a 17.4% walk rate against a 17.4 strikeout rate. So definitely the kind of balance you want to see there in terms of his batting eye. And that's particularly important for Gray because coming into the season, there were a lot of questions about his hit tool. You can see the Baseball America scouting grade down there below 40 for his hit tool, very poor. 60 power, 50 speed, 50 overall, high risk assessment, which for a prospect is pretty solid of his age and age. Baseball HQ, which is the other resource that I use, gave him a 2, which is the equivalent of about a 50 hit tool, a 4 for power, which is about a 60 on the 20 to 80 scale, a 3 for speed, which is about a 55, and an 8 overall, which is a 55 grade for the prospect. So Baseball HQ, is a little bit higher on him than Baseball America was going into the season. And so what we're seeing in terms of his performance over only 121 plate appearances so far is some really excellent velocities. Obviously, the surface stats are quite attractive, but as I said, the metrics of the walks to strikeouts is that probably more important at this stage, particularly given the concerns that Baseball America had about his hit tool coming into the season. And I think what's going to be really interesting about him is whether this can hold at all as we get into like later June, because then it'd be really time to get excited about Gray. The power really isn't in question for him. The question is whether he can make enough contact to really make that power in-game effective and get on base enough to contribute in other ways. The other thing that is interesting about Gray to me, and one of the reasons I've targeted him in a lot of leagues, both off the waiver wire and late in drafts, is his frame. He's 6'3", 215 at 18 years old, which means he's really got a solid frame behind that power grade. So I feel very confident that he's going to have the power. But it also suggests that he might not play catcher very much in the minor leagues. And indeed, he hasn't played a single inning at catcher this year, despite being drafted as a catcher out of high school. You very rarely see 6'3", 215 catchers in the major leagues. They're usually a little bit shorter. He's been playing first base, and he has a lot of athleticism. It's one of the things you read about Gray when you read scouting reports on him or listen to podcasts talking about him, which means he could project into the outfield. Right now, my understanding is that the team he is on in A-ball has a lot of outfielders on it already who the Rays want to see get playing time. So he has not appeared in the outfield yet. But that could be something that happens later in the season if the other outfielders on the team get advanced to high A ball. So we'll keep an eye on that for Gray. I think it's an interesting opportunity for him to play multiple positions, which would create a lot of opportunities to reach the majors besides just the first base path. And as I've talked about on other shows, when you're only playing first base, it is somewhat limiting for your ability to reach the major leagues, because a lot of players get shifted over to first base and there's higher competition, and therefore it is more difficult to get to the majors. So for Gray, it'll be really interesting to see if he can diversify his positions on defense, play a corner outfield, for example, right field, and that would enable him to have a lot more pathways to the majors. He obviously can fall back on catching maybe at some point too, but as I said, his frame is a little bit big for the position. So Gray is a guy I really like a lot. And, if I had a verdict, on Gray right now in terms of where he is, I'm definitely buying him if I can get him. And if I have him, I'm holding him because this guy is really exciting. He's hitting the ball really hard, with a lot of authority to all fields. And it'll be really interesting to see where things go as we head into June, as I said, and then leading into July. If he is a guy who slips a little bit and some of the enthusiasm for him dampers, I think it's a good opportunity to move in potentially and buy him and see where he goes. 18 years old, he's a long way from the majors, still has a lot to prove, but you like to see him performing at this level. It's encouraging. Again, power's not in question. Will the hit tool hold? I'm reasonably confident that we've seen enough that I'm going to hold on to him for the rest of the season and not sell him. And hopefully he pans out down the road. But that's the first guy on the hit list tonight, Tate and Gray, a really exciting player for the Rays. So let's move on to the next player for this evening, Tate Southesine. And I'm just going to call him Tate because that last name is a mouthful to keep pronouncing. But Tate's an interesting ball player too, for somewhat different reasons than Tate and Gray is. Tate was a first-round draft pick of the Atlanta Braves, a team that has done a nice job identifying and developing young, talented players. He's 19 years old. He's repeating A-ball. When I say repeating, he got a cup of coffee last year in A-ball following the draft, and he really struggled. He had about a 41% K rate. So there were a lot of questions in this year about his hit tool coming into the year, I should say. So the Braves put him back in A-ball again. You can see his scouting grades down there below. 40 hit tool, very similar to Tate and Gray that we were just talking about. For him, it's speed over power. So he's got a 60 speed grade, 50 power, average power, 55 overall, which is a testament to his defense and his speed upside. You can see Baseball HQ 3.348. So they are again a little bit higher on him than Baseball America, which is one of the reasons I take into account two sources when I do prospect evaluations in the player handbook that I put out every year. And one of the things that's interesting about Tate to me and these scouting grades is that there's a real delta between the Baseball America hit tool grade of 40 and the Baseball HQ grade of 3, which is about the equivalent of a 55 hit tool. And what that tells me, when you have two reasonably reliable sources differing that much on a skill grade, is that there is potential for improvement, right? Baseball America could be wrong and Baseball HQ could be right. So there's a buying opportunity potentially with Tate. Now he's 5'11", 180, relatively small frame. So we're not necessarily looking for a lot of power out of him. Having said that, I will say that he's been performing with some higher exit velocities thus far this season, which is encouraging, but there may be an inherent cap on his ability to really generate a lot of power with that smaller frame. So it's really a question for him of whether he can get on base enough and make enough quality contact to reach his speed in game. And in some respects, he's perhaps more valuable in a roto format where stolen bases carry a premium than in a points league. But I still think he has the potential to be a very productive points player as well. You can see his slash line, which is pretty solid, not great, certainly not in the Tate and Gray level of performance. But notably, his strikeout rate has come down substantially. It's still 24%, a little bit higher than you'd like it to be, but definitely better than the 40% he had last year. And I have a question from the audience. Is Gray a catcher or a first baseman? Well, I did cover this. He's playing first base exclusively this year. I think ultimately you're going to see him either at first base or in right field. So going back to Tate for a second, you saw a 24% strikeout rate, definite improvement over last year's 41%. Will it hold? Will it elevate back up to 30% in that range? We'll see. It's only 150 plate appearances so far, so it's still a very small sample size. But it is encouraging that he has a 16% walk rate thus far. So an interesting start for Tate. They're starting to get some momentum about him in the industry. So there may be some opportunities to acquire Tate. I just happened to trade Tate today to Evan in ABL, and I traded him for Braden Nett, who's a pitcher for the Seattle Mariners. And one of the reasons I made that deal was I thought it was time to cash in a little bit on Tate. And I really view him as a dealer's choice. Like, how much risk tolerance do you have? What are your objectives? So I just want to talk about the deal that I made with Evan a little bit for context. Nett is a 23-year-old college pitcher he's in the A's organization. I think I said the Mariners before. He's with the A's, and he's been hurt most of the year. He had a rotator cuff injury, had just come back and got re-injured again. And kudos to Evan for pointing out before we made the deal that he had been re-injured. So he's on the IL with an undisclosed injury, but I assume it has to do with his shoulder. So there's some risk there for him too. But at 23 years old, he projects as a mid-rotation starting pitcher, and he's very close to the majors. So there's a lot of value in ABL in a deep 30-team league like that to getting a prospect who can be in the majors maybe this year or next year, versus a 19-year-old like Tate, who maybe has some downside because of his hit tool. Evan obviously liked the athleticism and the upside that Tate offers and was willing to make the deal. So I could see it either way in this case, and certainly I could have been on the other side of that trade as well. But really interesting ball player. I think that if we see his walk rate and strikeout rates hold, even if the walk rate drops a little and the strikeout rate stays in that 20-25%, I think there's a lot of potential value in this kid, and it'll be very interesting to see what happens when he gets advanced to high A ball and to see how he performs there, because that will be a real litmus test to whether the gains that we're seeing right now at A ball are going to hold. So again, like the player Tate, not quite as much as Tate and Gray, who has that bigger frame that I always go after, but a very interesting middle infielder on a good organization that knows a lot about identifying young talent. So we'll see how Tate does the rest of the season. So I wanted to move on to my next boy, Ethan Salas, who I've talked about on the show many, many times. And Ethan has been kind of the bane of existence and the whipping boy for fantasy baseball circles for a couple of years now, because he was so heralded when he was coming out of the international signing process, and he has struggled so mightily at the plate over the last few years, basically his entire career. The Padres had advanced him very aggressively all the way up to AAA. He's back down in AA at 19, still very, very young, but repeating AA ball. 6'1", weighted 185, really good hitting frame, a little tall for a catcher too, not as tall as Tate and Gray, but a tall guy. But he's really knocking the cover off the ball so far. The surface stats are great, 319, 393, 553. Those are really catchy, but before we get too excited, let's dial it back and look at some of the underlying metrics. 11.2 walk rate, perfectly fine, not spectacular. The 23.4% K rate is still a little bit higher than you might want to see for a guy with this profile, who doesn't project as a huge power hitter. Still, like, the contact rate concerns me. It's not as bad as it has been, and the surface stats are really very nice. They're shiny, but this is a guy who has really, really struggled. And we should talk a little bit about his scouting grades that are at the bottom. One of the really interesting things is that Baseball America this year really dialed back his scouting grades. You can see he's 45 across the board in terms of the hit, power, and speed. They gave him a 55 overall, which is really a testament to his defense. But basically, those 45 grades mean he's below average regular on every single tool. Baseball HQ, again, was a little higher. They still like his hit tool, and they give him slightly above average power. The speed, they say, is average. And they gave him an 8, which is a 55 grade as well. So the same bottom line grade for both scouting services. But again, a little bit of a delta between the two of them, suggesting that there could be some variance in what you'll see in terms of what you could expect or reasonably anticipate Salas to produce. But, for me, Salas is a guy that if he's on the wire in your league, and a lot of people did cut him, perfectly fine to take a flyer on him and pick him up to see if this is real or whether it's, just a mirage. But if you're one of those guys who bought Salas coming out of his international signing period or traded for him when there was still a very shiny prospect price for him, to me, this is a good time to sell and sell hard. If you can get some value back for Ethan Salas. Owner like is starting to read about how Salas is doing all these things. Sees a clip of him hitting balls hard to the opposite field. This is a chance maybe to cash in and get some payback for the beat ups that you've taken the last several years, particularly if you're a team that's like challenging for the playoffs or you're deep, into your standings or high up there. This is a guy who might be able to net some really helpful major leaguer for, particularly if you package him with somebody else. But I would definitely be moving off Salas at this point. It's a sell high opportunity. I don't know how long it's going to last. He could prove us wrong. The pedigree, or could prove me wrong. The pedigree is there that says that he could be a really good ball player. But when you haven't shown a lot of bite this many years into the minor league career, I'm very suspicious that we'll ever really see it on a sustained basis. So I think in our league, John of the Detroit Tigers has him and has had him for many years. So John, if you're listening, sell, baby, sell. It's a good chance for you to get rid of Salas at this point. Somebody will take the bait. Probably somebody who doesn't watch the show. In any event, let's move on to the next guy, who's Seaver King. And Seaver is another kind of disappointing prospect, although for slightly different reasons. Not as heralded as a guy like Ethan Salas, but was considered a very safe floor guy coming out of college. 23 years old. He's repeating AA ball, 6 feet, 195, solid frame, but never had a scouting grade of like a really strong carrying tool in his hit or power grades. His calling card has always been his speed. And the question for him is whether or not he can really get on base enough to reach the speed and make it effective in game. He has really struggled the last couple of years to make consistent contact, quality contact. Has been basically a bust for the first round draft pick that a lot of people spent on Seaver King. But this year you can see his stats. He's like 319, 412, 575. The strikeout rate is down. It's down to 20%, 20.4%, which is a livable strikeout rate in this day and age. And his walk rate is up at 13.9%, which is like a plus walk rate. It's not, it's not great walk rate, but it's plus. You want something above 10%. And what's notable there, if he can sustain it, is that it allows him to make his speed effective on the base paths simply because he's on base more, right? So that is something that I'm watching really closely with Seaver King, because if he can get on base consistently, that speed has the potential to be an elite carrying tool. He's a middle infielder. He's going to get at bats because of his defense, and his speed could really add value, particularly again in a rotisserie league where you have stolen bases, provide premium value, and not as many players generate as many steals as back in the 80s, for example. Seaver King could provide a lot of value. A couple other notes about him that I've been reading about Seaver King that are kind of interesting. The Washington Nationals have a new general manager and a new player development system, and they've been making changes in Seaver King's approach to the plate, and he's made adjustments, some of which predate the change in ownership, in general managership. He had a very good Arizona Fall League, which you can't put too much stock into, except that he was implementing the mechanical changes then, and they have carried over into this season. And if those mechanical changes have translated into this improved walk and strikeout ratio, that is more interesting to me. So that's one thing I'm really watching. He's only about 137 plate appearances into a season. As we get into the end of July, and that plate appearance number gets up over 200, approaches that 250 range, if these numbers are holding, I'm starting to get excited about a guy like Seaver King, because you can see the risk grades down below for Baseball America and Baseball HQ. Baseball America gave him an A risk grade, which is average, which for a prospect is really good. That means he has a really really high floor. And, in a 30-team league, that has a lot of value because this guy, again, he can play defense, middle of the infield. He's going to get playing time. He's going to get plate appearances. If he can get on base, he can generate steals. Is he ever going to hit for power at the major league level? That's uncertain. You can see Baseball America gave him a 45 power grade, again, below average. 50 hit tool. That'll play if it can advance up to a 55 because of the mechanical changes that he has made. That would be better. So again, work in progress. Let's shift over to the Baseball HQ grades. Again, I always like contrasting the two of them. because it gives you some kind of like balanced view of a prospect, in my view. Baseball HQ gave him a 4 hit tool grade, which is significantly better. That's about the equivalent of a 60 hit tool grade. They gave him 3 first power, which is about a 55 power grade, 4 speed, which is a 60, and an 8 overall, which is a 55 again, so slightly above average grade for Seaver King overall, and a B risk grade, which again is very, very good for a prospect. Means again, he has a high floor. So this is a player who could grow into the Baseball HQ scouting grade or stay closer to the Baseball America grade. So for me, like Seaver King at this point, is a hold and watch guy. I'm interested in holding on to him. If you're one of these guys that drafted King really high and you're looking to sell him, you may be able to get value for him, but it might be a little bit harder for people to get excited about him because he doesn't have like a lot of power. He has not generated a lot of power in the minor leagues. And his stolen bases numbers have been solid, but they've not been gaudy because he hasn't been on base enough. But for me, he's a hold and watch guy. If I had him, I'd want to see how things progress, particularly because, again, mechanical changes that he's made in his setup. And if I'm thinking about acquiring him, I'd have to pay something for him at this performance level. I kind of want to make sure it's real, or at least real enough to make me feel a little bit more confident that I'm actually going to get something of value. So what I'm looking for here for King are those numbers 13.9% and 20.4%, are they holding as we come into the All-Star break? And if they are, like, this is a guy I might want to acquire, particularly as we go into this time of the year where a lot of teams are going to be dumping and trading out major league players from minor leaguers. And other owners are going to be looking to sell a guy like this. This is one guy you might want to put on your target list if the numbers hold up and are sustained. He's close to the majors, 23 years old. Presumably he's going to get a promotion to AAA pretty soon, which will be another testing ground of whether he can hold these gains at that level. But if he does, he's not that far from the majors. Would not be unforeseen to have him be playing in the majors next year, 2028 at the latest. So again, Seaver King, might be finally fulfilling that first round draft pick value. We'll see. Again, a hold and watch guy for me. So let's look at the next guy. This is the last guy on the list for tonight. And this is Ryan Mitchell of the Cardinals. Mitchell is a guy that I really liked during my draft process. I had a very highly ranked, you have the baseball handbook grade that I put together, 8.41 there amongst his stat lines. That's like, above average player, potential all-star level of a grade. Obviously, his stats have been nowhere near that. He's really, really struggled. And the numbers on the screen are reflective of his performance last night where he had 2 home runs. So they were much lower going into last night's game, and I had to change them this morning in preparation for the show to account for the 2 home runs. His slugging percentage jumped like 100 points. But that's also a comment about how few plate appearances he has, 123 plate appearances. And it's really easy this time of year to overreact to small sample sizes. And this still is a small sample size. This is a 19-year-old kid playing full season A ball. And I talked about that a little bit earlier in the show. This is not the short season A ball he's in. He's playing full season A ball. The Cardinals put him there. Age appropriate, but they could have held him back as a high school prep player in the shorter season A ball. Presumably he'd do better there. He's really being challenged right now, and we'll see how he adjusts. If you look at his scouting grades, right, this is always a guy who is considered to have really good contact ability, really good hit tool, really good command of the strike zone. See the scouting grade, Baseball America, 55 hit tool, 50 power, 55 speed, 55 overall. And if you shift over to Baseball HQ, 4, 3, 4, 8. So 60, 55, 60, 60. Excuse me, 55. So the 8's at 55. So both scouting services are really high on Ryan Mitchell, and the Cardinals in Chaim Bloom drafted him in the 2nd round. So a lot of smart people who follow prospects really like this guy, and he's really not delivering right now. So one of the things that I am looking at is the 16.3% walk rate, which is some slight confirmation of his ability to tell balls and strikes. But that 38.2% strikeout rate is really high, particularly for a guy who's supposed to be a contact maven. And it suggests to me that he's struggling making contact in the zone. We will see how he performs as we go into June. But for me, this is very much a hold and watch type of guy. The pedigree is like too good in terms of the scouting services to give up on this kid. But if you're thinking about acquiring him, there's a risk that he's going to get demoted to short A ball season or even to the CPX to like work things out, which would really put a dent in his like value, because that would be a vote by the Cardinals that they think something is like amiss, and then he needs to work things out, and you could end up seeing him really slide in prospect rankings. You could see his hit tool grade come down to 50, or a 3 or a 2 in Baseball HQ parlance. So you'd hate to see that. I'm just saying it's probably not time to pounce on him, but it's worth monitoring him, because if these numbers start to improve, and remember the surface stats will take a while to catch up, but if the walk ratio holds or gets better and the strikeout rate starts to come down as we go into June and complete the month of May, we're only halfway through the month and not even. This is a guy who you might want to start monitoring and start thinking about acquiring, because the scouting grades and the Cardinals' vote of confidence drafting him in the second round tells you that there's probably more than meets the eye test here for Ryan Mitchell. He's certainly a guy I bought a lot of shares of in the draft, and I'm certainly holding all those shares myself right now. But I don't have him in ABL, so maybe I can acquire him from Frank if Frank's willing to part with him. And hopefully Frank doesn't watch the show either. In any case, I really do like Ryan Mitchell still. I wouldn't give up on him. If you see somebody cut bait with him and put him on the wire, I think he's definitely worth a wire claim. I've started to see guys like him get cut. He was drafted in the second round, which means he was drafted pretty high in most drafts, so it might be a little early for that. But as we move into the end of this month, people might start cutting bait with him, because a lot of the other prospects who are having breakouts or so-called breakouts over our short sample sizes, particularly as the short A-ball season starts in the middle of this month, those pop-up prospects will get snapped up, and this is the kind of guy who may get cut by an owner who gets a little bit impatient with him. So in any case, those are my guys that I wanted to talk about tonight. I think it's really important to keep in mind that we're still very early in the minor league season. A lot of leagues are just getting started this week or next week. And of course, the DSL will start in June, which will be exciting for me. I've actually looked into trying to get tickets to try to attend a DSL game. It turns out you don't even need tickets. You just show up and stand outside the gate, and hopefully the security guard lets you in so you can see these players. But in any case, there's a lot of baseball left to be played in the minor leagues. Probably too early to start cutting these players that people invested high draft picks in. But impatience is a thing. As we move into the dump season, we move into like a high trading season in June and July. This is the type of guy you might be able to get. Seaver King's the kind of guy you might be able to watch. Ethan Salas is a guy you might want to dump. If you get Tate and Gray, God bless you. And if a guy has Tate and Gray, who's like really doing well in the league and needs a piece to help him put him over the top, Gray is a perfect guy to target to try to get. I happen to have Gray in ABL, so you guys are not getting him. Although I've had a lot of inquiries about him, but he's not going anywhere, because I think he's one of the prospects that has a chance to really go up a lot in his scouting grades this year. If you think back to the scouting grade that Baseball America gave Tate and Gray, give him a 40 hit tool, I would not be surprised if this performance progresses into late June, that when Baseball America redoes its grading systems, and they do that sometimes in the middle of the year, I would not be surprised to see a change in the grade for him, particularly after they get some opportunities to look at him live and not just relying on the exit velocity data that's coming out. I'll note that Tate and Gray is like in RoboScout, one of Baseball America's publications. He's like the #1 prospect in A-ball right now. He has a perfect RoboScout score of 100. So very exciting player. Definitely got a target, in my opinion, in leagues where he's on a team that's doing well and wants to get a couple major league pieces to go over the top. Other guys we talked about, Tate, self-esteem, interesting ball player. Again, I would wait and see how it goes with him, but certainly understand Evan jumping on the opportunity to get him now. There's a lot of momentum building up about him, and has the potential to be a really exciting, ball player in the middle of the infield. In any event, that's this evening's show. A quick one for tonight. Hope to see you on the next show, and very exciting. I'll be previewing the DSL League pretty soon, which I'm very excited about. But for all you watching live, I appreciate you tuning in, and everybody who watches later, thanks for tuning in then. And in the interim, remember to ABP, always be prospecting.